you're on. Libby and Len, I'd like you to tell us a little about yourselves and your motivation that brings you to the projects you're working on now, and then tell us about the project itself, what you've done, and where you plan to go from here.
Okay, do you want to start?
So who are we and where are we going? I'm an American Jew, and my ancestors came to northern Minnesota, to Duluth, Minnesota, in the 1800s. And they were Jews from Bohemia and Hungary. And they were followed about 10 years later, after the first pogroms, by my Russian Jews, who also came to Duluth. And there were hundreds of them. And that's where I was born. And then right after World War II, my parents and I moved to Los Angeles. So I grew up in California in Jewish youth organizations. I was in we helped establish a synagogue in Los Angeles. I was in a Jewish fraternity at UC Berkeley and president of the Jewish dental alumni after I graduated from dental school and became a pediatric dentist. So that's my background coming into Jewish-Palestinian dialogue, and although Libby and I were interested in issues of war and peace and human maturation, parenting, things that had to do with people and life, I really did not have any idea who a Palestinian was until about 13 or 14 years ago. So I grew up with an inherited agenda and with a real lack of understanding about the other with regard to the relation of Israel. They were invisible to me, really.
I come from different roots. My background is not Jewish or Palestinian. I'm a mix of English, Irish, Norwegian, English. I said that one. Just the real mix. And my ancestors came to America even long before Len's did and settled in the Midwest. And so my background was very limited and very narrow. I had no Palestinian friends. I didn't know who a Palestinian was. I had a lot of Jewish classmates, and I knew I had Jewish friends, but my immediate family was Protestant. And in fact, my family was quite prejudiced. They were prejudiced towards just about anybody who wasn't what we were. And so when I met Len and we got married, it was kind of a little thump on the family history, but they learned to love and appreciate Len very much. And our lives have meshed together quite well, I would say. We've had lots of the same interests. My background is a social worker, and we've just done all these. Somehow our lives have just led in a direction of volunteer work and caring about human beings, families. We've worked on television violence, drugs and alcohol, you name it, we've been interested in it. And that kind of led us into, in the 80s, working to try to figure out how to stop the huge threat that was posed between the United States and the Soviet Union with their atomic weapons. And that sort of launched us on a path of beyond war and being concerned about more than just what was happening in our neighborhoods. We became much more aware of global concerns, and that one thing led to another until in the early 90s, we had this opportunity to meet and begin working with Palestinians and Jews, a whole new arena for us. So we had a lot to learn, and we're still learning about this issue every single day as we work with these people, bringing Jews, American Jews, and American Palestinians together in face-to-face relationship building, believing that an enemy is someone whose story we have not heard. And that's kind of the undergirding of our philosophy. is the importance of bringing people together who pose an enemy so that they can learn to see each other as humans and equal. So what would you add about a little bit more about our mission?
Well, I think we have heard and experienced that an enemy is somebody whose story you have not heard. And that is the way life seems to work. We worked with Soviets all during the 80s. I learned Russian on my own, not wanting to make them always learn our language. And it made a huge difference in relationships. My Russian was so-so, but a language, a vocabulary enough to build relationships. And when we finally went to the Soviet Union in the 1980s and got on the streets and met the people and also met officials, it occurred to us right away that Cold War and this distance we had kept between each other was a total waste of time, and and it also emphasized the importance of citizens, that not waiting for governments, where change never occurs beginning with government. The creativity always comes from the people, as it did bringing the Cold War to a close. And it's not always visible, it's not always in the headlines, but it really made us quite religious about that. The importance of our time on Earth and the ability to, once we're face to face, to really connect at the heart. And then at the intellect with the Soviets, they were wonderful, capable, able, creative, courageous, stuck with it, never gave up. So many qualities. So we helped establish the Beyond War movement in the 80s, and then as the Cold War wound down, some citizen leaders, Palestinians and Israelis, came to us and said, you did this with the Soviets pretty well. Could you bring us to America? Because it's not legal for us to have a meeting here where we live. So we did, in cooperation with Stanford. And that week in the Redwoods was an astounding breakthrough, where they moved out of their self-centeredness into an interest in the other, and they actually wrote and signed the first document, really, between Israelis and Palestinians that included the PLO. And it was called Framework for a Public Peace Process. And it appealed to citizens to not wait for governments alone to move us to a new place and redirect history. But it appealed for us to build personal, change human relationships, which governments are not free to do. And to fertilize the soil so that a treaty is not just a cold piece of paper, but that it's alive when it's written and ready to be lived. And so that's what we've been doing. Beginning in this living room, after we went to Jerusalem to help gel this team that came over here, as a working team over there, we came home and the women, Libby, really said, we've done this globally. Now what can we do locally to really bring this process to life? Because people over there are a little bit too afraid, a little bit too stuck, a little too numb to have the courage to move out to each other. And it wasn't easy here.
No, I would say that it's really the same thing here, that people are afraid and numb and scared and have all kinds of ideas about if you talk to the other, you're betraying your own. And some of the greatest fear we've found in the dialogue activity is not so much of the other as it might be of our own people who criticize us for trying to build these bridges. And there's a lot of fear in that. But when we first started, we didn't really know what we were getting into. We just knew that the concept of bringing people together in face-to-face relationship building had been so amazing at this week with these people from the Jerusalem area who had come together, had really intense struggles and really bumped heads, and in the end were able to write this amazing document and to go home feeling united. And it was fantastic. So we said, that's got to happen here. The United States the people who live here don't know what's going on over there. They really don't have an understanding. I know we certainly didn't. And the news doesn't tell you enough. It tells you very little about what the day-to-day life is of both peoples. So sort of the first ground rule we had was that we were for both peoples equally. We were not going to be a group of people who just championed one side, because we feel that's the base of many problems, is when you are championing only one side, that means there's going to be a loser. We are about two winners, or one winner, however you want to look at it. So it took us a good 6 months to find a core of people who were willing to go against their communities and come and sit together in a living room and begin to share at a depth that we weren't used to doing. Mm-hmm. And there was a lot of tension in the room. Mm-hmm. And I remember when the Palestinians first showed up and all the women sat on this couch and kind of practically held each other's hands and the Palestinian women, and didn't say anything. And you could see them mumbling and talking to each other in Arabic. Told us later, it was like, well, what are we doing in this Jewish household, and why are we here? And they had all these funny stories that they told us. And then after they left, they said, that felt really important. That felt really good. We could tell our story. And so they came back. And it was the beginning of a really good core group of people who saw the importance of meeting with each other, having integrity. And that was more than 12 years ago. And those people now are good friends. They may not always agree on all the issues, but they appreciate each other as human beings. We've experienced death in the group. We've had marriage. We've had new babies born. We go to each other's events. We care about each other. And it's been an amazing blossoming of relationships and seeing each other as human beings with whom we could live. We don't have to be separated. So a lot of this has been very painful. When the news is bad, we've committed ourselves and said we're not going to go up and down with the news. We're not going to let the group disband if the news is bad. That's the time we need to hold together even more. And so through that first group coming together, then we've had outreach activities. And through those outreach activities and inviting our friends and neighbors, other groups have spawned off. And now here in the San Francisco Bay area, there are 10 dialogue groups. And around the country, there are probably 50 plus more dialogue groups.
And the original San Mateo dialogue is getting ready for its 149th meeting. And there's always more. There is always more.
This is the living room where
This is the living room where it started.
That's right. And visitors come often. Palestinians come to visit. Israelis come to visit. And they seem to take great heart in what's going on. And we found ourselves becoming a communication hub also for those who are interested in this relationship building activity, this public peace process, here in North America, in the Middle East, and worldwide. Chile, Australia, Jerusalem, Ramallah.
Canada.
All across Canada. Mm-hmm. So an individual does make a difference. And Elie Wiesel, a Holocaust survivor, said that people become the stories they hear and the stories they tell. And so part of it has been doing this dialogue and bringing people together. And the other part has been to be able to tell the story and to tell it as broadly as we can. CNN has been in this room, and MSNBC, all the local press, all the local radio, all the local TV stations. They've all been to the dialogues, either in this home or a Palestinian home. We were rarely together like this. Usually we did not even go in public without our Palestinian partners, so this is unusual.
How many, say, separate Palestinian families have you interacted with or come to know?
Hundreds. All over the United States, all over this area. Of the 10 dialogues in the Bay Area, each has about 30 participants. And then there are people who come to events. After we were 5 years old, just a handful of us in this one dialogue, the San Mateo dialogue, decided we want to do something really impactful. So we had this idea, and we did have a dinner dialogue in a San Francisco hotel for 440 American Jews and Palestinians. And it was like a dream, like what the future could be, with 42 tables of 10 balanced Palestinians and Jews at each table, relating. It was that really began to make a big shift in the Bay Area. That's when the second dialogue started, the second of the now 10, and I think it really fastened the whole function of dialogue down in California and really in North America that night.
Because a lot of people came from other states and cities to that dinner. When they heard it was happening, people flew in from other places, and so it was a big deal. It was the first time, and it was the first time many of those Palestinians and Jews had ever met the other. So the tension and the electricity in the air was palpable. I mean, people said, I don't know what to expect, and I've never sat at a table with a Palestinian or a Jew, and, you know, they were kind of shaking and excited, and we had questions that we posed that people could talk about at the table, and we had a candle lighting ceremony, and a Palestinian and a Jew lit the candles at the table, and it was there were a few little tiffs that happened at a couple of the tables, but a lot of very positive things happened too. People laughed and got to know each other and said, let's get together and I'll have you for dinner at my house, and it was amazing.
I think one thing that we remember really well is when we decided to raise money for people in the Middle East and somehow help them, and to do it for both peoples equally. We did it for a hospital in Gaza and a women's hospital in Jerusalem, and then for a school in Ramallah and a school in Netanya, Israel. And it was interesting how we did it, and it was very difficult because a Jew had to go to other Jews and ask for money, and half would go to help the Palestinians. But the Palestinians, who are in very difficult financial situation in Gaza and the West Bank, terrible, they had to go to Palestinians and say half of this is going to go to Jews. And it took incredible courage. And I remember that we were in the Salem's home, in a Palestinian home, and it was full of people. And they were just going around collecting cash. They collected $4,000 that night in cash in their living room.
They said you can't eat until you pay.
It was really stirring, the identity it took for them and the Jews to do what was done. So these relationships are hard won. These expressions take courage. It's a lot harder than picking up a weapon. It's really the workout. And as Libby said, the judgment, the fear is not really so much of the other. It's fear of judgment from your own people, from being rejected from the clan.
That's a powerful fear, to be, outed from the tribe or
And
whatever.
definitely.
Yeah.
So what?
How about the future plan is essentially just keep growing. Is there any additional aspects that you plan, or is it a matter of this is working well, just let's get it out to more and more cities?
Well, we
the
do.
camps?
Yeah, a couple of things we do quite a bit of is we're invited to go to schools and colleges and foundations or clubs, and we provide panels where 2 Jews and 2 Palestinians tell their story, and then we introduce the concept of pure dialogue to the audience, and we have them participate in a dialogue. And in many of these places, then they might start their own dialogue club on the campus.
Oh, yeah.
And 2 years ago now, we went to Washington, D.C., and we met on the campus of, not George Washington, Georgetown. And they brought in students from Georgetown who had never come together before. They'd had a lot of tension on the campus with demonstrations, and all the different clubs, the Jewish clubs, the Arab clubs, the Christian, Jewish, Muslim clubs, all co-sponsored. And we had a big room of students, and after we left, they started 5 dialogue groups on that campus. So we feel like it's a model, and the goal is just to keep spreading it and getting enough people have the experience of what a real dialogue is here in America to understand that it is an action. One of the things that we hear a lot is they say, it's not enough of an action. Dialogue, just sit in the living room and talk to each other and make nice, just makes people feel good, but what does it really do? And our experience is that for people to come together and be real, expose their deepest, heartfelt feelings, thoughts, dreams, is very challenging, very scary, because you're putting yourself out there on the line.
It's really, when we go on the campuses, you can see that it's at the beginning of the end of the war on that campus. And we worked with just a handful of students at UC Berkeley last year, and they created for themselves, we helped them some, a day of mutual recognition where they brought the Arabs and the Jews together on that campus, which had been on fire. And you could just see that after that day, the campus was changed. It wasn't perfect, but people were starting to listen to each other some. And those students changed, and it was, you can just see that the students are struggling to hang on to their idealism and go for something new. And it's very hard for them to find an adult to help them. And the adults in the communities of the opposing communities really teach the students to take sides, to stand up for themselves, which is really just another expression of war. But there are very few people who can teach them to sit down in a safe place and listen. And a couple of weeks ago, we were just invited by the United States Navy school in Monterey to go in there and teach military officers from around the world about Palestinian Jewish dialogue and about a new quality of listening and about how you can relate very differently to people anywhere in the world. And they were moved. And so we feel like we've been to the State Department, we've been to Washington, we've interfaced with our Congress people, the press pays attention wherever the dialogue is, it's news, and we feel like it's coming along, this public peace process.
So it is an action, and I would say when people say, well, what can you do here in America? Why do you think you can change anything? I think the answer is we live here. We're thousands of miles away. We cannot change anything on the ground directly in Israel with the Palestinians.
Not tomorrow.
Not tomorrow. Maybe not next week. But we do have the power to change the way people think right here where we live. And that's very important because right here where we live is a huge pocket of influence. This country has enormous influence around the world, and especially in Israel. And so if we can help people have hope, see that there is a way to relate, and that we're doing it here, and instead of sending money to promote one side over the other by their relatives, but to be for both peoples equally, I think that's what our job is to educate here in America, to get people to think new, and to provide hope for those people. And it is an action, and it takes work.
One thing that I think you might want to add is maybe this is the first time on film this has ever been said, but a lot of people have heard about the Seeds of Peace, for instance, summer camp in North America, in New England, that has brought since 1993, I think it's 1993, Palestinian and Israeli youth and others worldwide together at a safe summer camp environment in Maine to help them see themselves differently and relate differently. What's not well known is there are now a dozen camp experiences like that in North America. And we are just initiating a gathering for the first time of the conveners and the facilitators and the cultural creatives who have invented those camps and have the wherewithal.
Behind those, the seed for
individual citizens. These are all just individual citizens with imagination and courage and some knowledge of how to function in the world and how to go deep into the individual, who have brought these camps together. So we're going to convene for the first time the conveners of those camps, because we feel like here on this continent, they probably hold within themselves the largest pool of knowledge, of collective wisdom about the public peace process for the Middle East. What works, what doesn't work.
Where is that planned to occur?
There's interest right now by the Fetzer Institute in Kalamazoo, Michigan. We do not know if they are going to decide to do this or not, but right now they're very interested. And we're going to meet tomorrow with the representative from Fetzer who happens to be here.
So they would hold that at their facilities?
If it happens.
So this is probably the biggest pool of unassimilated new social intelligence for the Middle East peace process. So we're quite excited about bringing those people together to see how they work with young people and how they help the young people transcend their differences.
So perhaps each of these separate camp activities could have a different approach. I mean, it's not a unified single approach.
No, they're all they function totally independently, and some of them didn't even know the other one existed. So that's why we feel like it's real important to bring them together so they can talk about their struggles and what they've learned. Like some focus on art, some dance and music, some on outdoor activities. So they all have maybe unique themes depending on where they live or who's leading the camp and what their particular skills are.
These camps have names like Piece It Together, Seeds of Peace, Building Bridges for Peace, Creativity for Peace Camp in New Mexico that does focus on the arts. And the one here that the local dialogues helped start, along with Camp Tawanga, is called Oseh Shalom Saneh Asalam, Palestinian Jewish Family Peacemakers Camp. And next weekend, we'll have our second annual camp.
Oh, that's the one I was almost able to
Right.
go to.
Yes, near Yosemite. And that is a great experience where we don't just have a meeting 2.5 hours a month, but that we live together for 3 days and 2 nights. And again, it's historic. It's a new model that in time, when the people are open and ready, and it could move right across the ocean to Jerusalem. We hope it will.
Yeah. Pat, what was the question?
Well, what I was curious about was the first day of one of these dialogues, when you've got a whole room full of people who've never seen each other, what is like a sample of how you would get them talking, or, not just sit in the room staring at each other? And, I mean, what would you do to...
Usually the way that works is one of the dialogue groups would have an introductory event. And I think the most recent one we had was at the Salem's Deli Cafe. And everybody was supposed to bring a friend, invite somebody new. So about 40 or 50 people came. And we had food, and people just were social together. And then several members of the hosting dialogue group got up and talked about dialogue and the meaning of dialogue and why we do it. And we had everybody in the room introduce his or herself and briefly and why they came. So there was a feeling of people's motivation for being in the room. And then we said, if you'd like to be in a dialogue group, sign up. So that kind of set a context. And there were a few people who came because they were curious and then didn't sign up. And then there was a whole group of people who did sign up, and that was a year ago. And we now have this new group going. So at a meeting with a new group of people, we always start by having everyone take time to tell their personal story. Who are you? Who are your grandparents? Where did you come from?
What were you taught
About the other.
Yeah.
So
Very interesting.
yeah, so it's really it's not political. People say things sometimes that are hard to hear because if they're a refugee or whatever, it's hard. Sometimes you haven't heard that story directly, and so it's painful. But because it's a person's personal story, you can't really say it's not true or, that's not the news account that I heard. It's personal.
Yeah.
And that takes a while. I mean, it takes several meetings because we give people plenty of time to do that, and kind of new people add in. So each time we reintroduce, and the new people take longer and go deeper. And then from the things that we hear from each other, we begin to explore more. Like, tell me more about why do you believe that? Who taught you that? What does that mean to you? And we begin to try to clarify things that may not really be true, but they're based on stereotypes.
So that dialogue really is not. It's a new quality of listening, is how it starts, without yes but.
Yeah.
And it's not discussion, and it's not debate, and it's not conversation, which is casual and superficial and courteous. It's not discussion, which is like percussion or concussion, where you're batting around like well-formed ideas like a ping pong ball, waiting for what you're going to say next. And it's definitely not debate, where you are putting down the other person's idea, lifting yours up, and nothing is learned. But in dialogue, you really do expand your own knowledge, and together you discover a new social intelligence up here that alone you never would have.
Yeah.
So there's a synergy. There is it's almost as if you fulfill the conditions of really good listening, that you get a little help. That something happens where an intelligence comes into the room that you can't will it. It just happens because both peoples have been faithful to this process. It's like, to me, in the 23rd Psalm, thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. It's like it's a sacred place. And if you do it right, it's blessed. And you get help. That's what I experience.
The process where you are slowly blending in new people, kind of like into a group that already has done a few cycles of exchange. That's really a lot like these 12-step programs, where when you join a program, it's been in activity for years, and there's a slow trickle of newcomers. And newcomers, they don't know what they're going to find, and they're going to see. They don't have to say anything. You don't have to speak if you're not ready. But what you see is other people that have been there, by and large, for a long enough time to be able to easily express their inner emotions. And it gets, you hear somebody telling a story, and then the other side of the room, somebody breaking down in tears because that was that person's story too, or it was very close to what they went through, and it was just a sympathetic arousal on the other person's part when they heard their story being told out of somebody else's mouth.
We're still learning about that one. And that when a new person comes into the midst, it can throw the growth process, the deepening process back for some of the participants, but it may help the new participants. And on the other hand, when new people come in, it brings in a vitality, and that new people are coming in, and you see the people who have been there see the process growing. So we're still learning about the dynamics of that and what helps and what inhibits.
Mm-hmm.
The thought I have on the 12 steps is, if there's too many newcomers at one time, there's not a critical mass of old timers to kind of carry that process. Like the idea of one person speaks, no one interjects. You choose a certain person to tell their story, and they tell their story after they raise and say, hi, I'm Gary, and everyone says hi, Gary, and same as in AA. The thing is, if a whole bunch of newcomers come in, and then there's only newcomers and one old comer. Like one time I was leading a group. I was the old comer, and every other person in that group was the first time. And I felt myself very hard-pressed to give them, how to show them how this is done when I was the only one that would be sharing at that level. And they're just watching me, and it's like I was trying to do it to display, here's what you do, but it's pretty hard when you're the only old timer. And I can see where it would be an ideal blend of newcomers to old comers. Like at any one new meeting, ideally you'd only want to load on a certain fraction of newcomers. I don't know what that magic number would be, but you wouldn't want to have the center of gravity of the whole group, fall back to the newcomers, where there's all that that anxiety and distrust.
And not only that, we have to work really hard to keep some balance. So if a new Jewish person wants to join the group, sometimes we have to say, we'll put your name on a waiting list, because if you have a Palestinian friend to bring with you, fine.
Okay.
And also some of the groups are really big. So since we meet in living rooms, there is a capacity that if you get too big, it's not comfortable, and everybody can't be part of the dialogue because there's just too many people.
Too many to get
So we figure it's better if there were, say, 15 to 20.
Kind of an
and balance it. It doesn't have to be perfect, but so everybody feels represented. So it's a challenge to keep it going and to keep new people who want to come, have a place for them, keep the groups balanced, keep the spirits up.
Yeah.
Right now there's been a lot of bad news. People feel very let down. The wall that's going up has been very hard on both peoples, and just separating them and making things worse. So people feel discouraged, and sometimes they feel like they want to quit. And we always work hard to keep that committed core committed. It's very important.
Do you find that there's any opposition to your program from various Jewish groups as entities, like Anti-Defamation League, or they play a role at all, or they pretty much just keep hands off?
I remember when we were invited to do a panel for a youth group in the Jewish community at the Jewish Community Center in San Francisco. And we were pretty excited about that, 2 Jews, 2 Palestinians. And then we were told that 2 leadership in the Anti-Defamation League was going to be there. And I thought, we could be in for some judgment here, because they're going to hear some very direct stories from Palestinians that they may not be used to. And that evening was such a great surprise. And it was just a thrill how well the panel did, and how well the students responded. And at the end, the women asked, how could we be in a dialogue? So we have done the same at the Ramallah Club, as Libby said, at the Arab Cultural Center. And the dialogue is trusted in both communities. and we're asked to help in events sponsored by the local Jewish Federation and AIPAC and ADL, Jewish Community Relations Council, synagogues, Arab organizations. Our articles are on Arab websites and Jewish websites, and it's a good sign.
I think, it's fair to say, though, that there are those who wouldn't participate in the group. There are Palestinians who say, it's not action-oriented enough for me. If you can't change something on the ground, forget it. Yeah. And they don't participate. And there are some very strong Jews who just can't imagine sitting in a room with the enemy. Yeah. So it's not the Jewish foundations as a whole that don't trust us. They do, like what Len just said, but there are individuals who, for their own personal reasons, would choose not to participate, which is too bad, because it would be nice if some of the more hardcore people who are more resistant and stay separate would come and test the water and tell their stories and see the meaning of being heard and how minds can change and hearts can open.
It's old thinking.
It is old thinking.
It's just old thinking. Thinking that there's the illusion that there's individual survival, and there isn't. Not today. Yeah. Not in a nuclear and biological and chemical world. You cannot.
We're all in the same lifeboat.
We sure are. And if your end has got a hole in it, mine does too.
Yeah, it's hard to get away from the big picture nowadays. Well, I'm out of time to switch. Is it okay if we keep on going?
If you want to. Outcome.
How would you picture an ideal solution? Not necessarily likely or realistic, but if things went perfect, which they usually don't, but ideally, if you had to say all your wishes to be granted about this long time problem, what would that peace look like?
So your question is, what would a peace look like in the Middle East?
No, your ideal peace. I know there's a lot of ways of finding peace, but what would you like to see as the most?
So your question is, what would an ideal peace look like to me in the Middle East? Mm-hmm. And I think it's really important to say that we're talking about people, and we're talking about relationships. And the violence that we're seeing now is an abject failure of relationships and of diplomacy and of statesmanship. There is a huge disconnect between the peoples. They have almost no relationship. They do not know each other's narratives. And so this allows them to dehumanize each other, which is the default setting of people. Feeling only your own pain, blaming the other, dehumanizing the other, and it allows you to rationalize doing really bad things to each other. People talk about a two-state solution, and there is no treaty that can solve this relationship. It's about people and it's about relationship. So in an ideal solution, I would see people who had a new capacity and interest in listening to one another. Because this is how you see each other as human and equal. And a huge change occurs, not in a treaty, but you start to want the best for the other. And that's born again. That is a new kind of human being, and that's what it's about. It goes back to the individual, and it goes back to your relationships. And after there is consensus and relationship among the people decide what kind of borders and boundaries and agreements and cooperation and exchange and sharing of water and land and airspace and borders and affection, because it's about relationships. And so to ask me about borders and boundaries, I think is skipping a lot of steps.
And the one thing that people have to do now is to start to build those relationships. And it is only through that passage and staying together like that, that a whole new social intelligence develops. And there will be solutions that, as Einstein said, you can't solve today's problems with the same kind of thinking that produced them. So I would not be arrogant enough to think that I know what's right for the people over there. But I can help them come together and change what is possible for people. And that's how they relate. They live within, they can see the light in each other's windows now, and they still don't meet. They stay home because they're waiting for a political messiah, and it's not going to happen. You can't have peace. You can't want peace and not relationships. So why don't, maybe you have something to say more than I do about that.
I don't really. I think you expressed what I feel too. I mean, the only thing that I would add is I keep thinking at some point in time, if the relationships are right, people can step outside of the box, as we say, and think in new ways. Mm-hmm. And right now, everything that's going on is the old way. It's old thinking. And the people who are leading the countries right now are the oldest thinkers. And they are pulling from their past history of where violence was used to resolve problems. And back to what we said earlier about living in a nuclear, chemical, and biological age, we can't solve any problems anymore with violence. We have to all, as human beings, step outside this old way of thinking and think totally new about what's being asked for each of us as individual citizens. What does it mean to be fully human? What does it mean to use, especially here, our gifts of comfort, and we have a very easy life here. And so I think that there are a lot of people that we should be thinking about and helping and supporting who don't have the same blessings that we do and opportunities and freedom. But to impose our way on another country or other people's is not going to work. I think we have to help pull the best from people by helping them talk about it, think about it, work together, support each other. And I agree with you. I don't begin to have a feeling and understand what the ultimate solution for those people would look like, but I hope it's based on caring about each other and having all their basic human needs met in whatever form it is. Right now, the basic human needs aren't even being met. There's not enough water for people. There's not enough jobs and work. I mean, if all of these things are met, I think it would be much easier to say, okay, as long as we get what we need, if you want to have the road go over here, that's okay, but don't stop me from going to work and don't stop me from going to school. And I think we just have to think totally new.
That framework for a public peace process that was written and signed 13 years ago in the Sequoias when we brought together the Israelis and Palestinians, the citizen leaders. The elements of that are really the elements in every treaty that has been proposed since then, official and non-official, that has made sense to moderates on both sides. But the people and the governments have never had the will on both sides to follow through on those treaties. And it's very clear that it's because of the relationships. There's still so much fear, so much mistrust, so much striving to maintain personal power by the professional politicians and even some citizen leaders on both sides, that these treaties have been inhibited and not been fulfilled. So it's very clear that the root cause of that is the relationships. And that, as Hal Saunders, who was Assistant Secretary of State,
and the successful facilitator for 5 successful Arab-Israeli treaties, has said this is the citizen century, where a few citizens free of government can do a lot of damage, like 9/11. And citizens free of governments can do a lot of good and bring in the creativity and the will and build a model of people living together and relating together that is so compelling, so intelligent, so beautiful, that it will move throughout North America and go back across the ocean to Jerusalem. And that's what's going to make a difference. And that's why we use our lives the way we do.
We've gotta be strong for each other. And one heart in everyone. We've got to love one another to carry on. We can be strong.